Good evening. It's Paranormal Science Lab Live. I'm Lisa.
I'm John.
And our guest tonight is Ryan Stroud. Ryan is a spiritual warfare specialist. Ryan's been with us before, and we've got a unique topic to discuss tonight. I think it's going to be fun for everybody. Basically, urban legends of the paranormal. Ryan, how are you doing?
Doing great. How are you guys doing?
Oh,
Excellent.
we're doing pretty good, and John's keeping us safe over here with his staff and his veil.
Yeah. I'm hiding behind the veil. Get it? But I'm
We're going to have to lift the veil here in a bit. How are you doing, though?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to tonight, and that you guys surprised me with pointy hats, so.
Yeah, where's your hat at, dude?
I didn't know I was supposed to wear one. Sorry.
She never tells anybody anything.
Well, we like surprises. Keep
I can tell.
keep everyone on their toes.
I feel like a widow.
You are a widow. Hey, Ryan, since we're talking about entities that are fictional but people have come to believe are true, or at least some people, I know we talked about some of the ones you want to talk about. Talk about Philip first. I think that's really fascinating how that came about.
Sure. The Toronto Society for Physical Research in 1970, they decided they were going to make up a entity, a ghost. And that ghost name was Philip Eilsford. And basically what happened was, after they decided to make this backstory, they decided to contact him during a seance. And through doing the seance, they were picking up more information about the backstory than they had told other people about. So what's interesting about this concept is people are actually picking up on this information, which they attributed to this fake good person, per se, and people are actually getting responses back from an entity claiming to be Philip, or, they created some type of thought form in which they were communicating with. The interesting thing about Philip itself was it was the first major scientific viewpoint dealing with thought forms. Thought forms have been around forever. I mean, from a kid's imaginary friend to the tulpas that the Buddhists made, or they make. It's just an interesting concept to actually see science pointed at it in order to, bring this level of, I guess, meditation or, thought control to bring out the entity itself.
So the people that actually received information from Philip, were they part of the control group that knew what was going on, or were these people that didn't know that this was a fabrication?
Well, it started out where the original group was. They were getting the information and realizing that it could be some sort of subconscious influence that they were bringing to the table. They decided to branch out and bring people in that didn't know anything about Philip and let them control the experiments and let them, they didn't know they were experiments, but they allowed them to lead the seance. And then from that seance, they were picking up information about Philip that the group had not released to the public.
But that they had set down in their case study.
Correct.
Okay. I guess go ahead.
No, I'm saying that's a very interesting concept. A lot of people believe that, it was all a hoax. Like perhaps these people were actually in on it and they were just trying to use some type of fantastic information to make their experiments seem more credible or more fascinating. But I mean, that's just a theory that was placed towards the group itself. So,
well, here, just stir the pot. Thought came to mind that maybe. How would you relate that to experiences people have with Ouija board or witch board?
Pretty much, they're doing the same thing. In my opinion, there hasn't been an actual spirit board or communication board since they handmade them and spent meticulous hours and put their own incantations and blood and sweat and tears and make these boards. The concept Ouija board that came out when they were mass produced as as a game, sort of like Scrabble. It's kind of, made me resent the whole don't touch a Ouija board thing, because it's not, in my opinion, it's not even close to the original spirit boards. It takes a lot more than to take your board out of a box and put your hands on the piece in the middle and allow it to tell you answers. I mean, the concept of Ouija board is really frustrating to me, and I can go on that for hours if you want me to. But
Well, okay. I tell you what, maybe for because I know there's probably a lot of people out there that really don't know that there is a big difference between a witch's board and a Ouija board. Why don't you explain why is the Ouija board that you buy commercially not really a witch's board? What's the difference?
The fact that a witch's board was usually handmade by the practitioner. They incorporated their intention, their spells. They usually communicated with one particular spirit, or actually a spirit guide that they've worked with over countless years. It wasn't like, I'm going to put my hands in the planchette and ask for somebody, and then, oh my God, I've got 500 demons trying to talk to me. It wasn't like that. They actually had the intention to work with the spirit or with a ghost that they've actually communicated with before and had a relationship with. The Ouija board that came out when it was mass-produced as a game for family fun night is, it's just a concept that they use, that they've mimicked the spiritual movement. They had these spiritualists who would rap on the table and, make fake seances and try to scare people for money. And when they decided they were going to make this, they were looking at a way to make money. And that's where the whole concept of the Ouija board came about. In my opinion, you can have the same amount of luck with busting out your Scrabble board and putting your hands in the middle of the board and asking questions, because you're going to get the same results. But to me, that's the difference between the manufactured Ouija board and the actual spirit communication boards that were actually handmade.
So a spirit board would be more akin to items that you see in traditional societies, Native American or otherwise, that shamans would use to go to communicate with the other side.
Now, to an extent, the shamans wouldn't really necessarily need a board, since they see their spirit guides and animals and plants and through meditation. What you'd be looking at for spirit board, think more ceremonial magic, your necromancy, your nocturnal witchcraft, witchcraft in general. A lot of times, it's something that dealt more with a set itinerary for communicating with spirits.
Okay, so all the hype with Ouija boards that you're opening a portal. What would you say to that?
That, to put frankly, it's all, to me, it's fabrication. I know there's been a lot of people who have claimed experiences, and you know what, they may very well have, but to me, the fact that the Ouija board that was there, it was just a coincidence. I mean, like I said, I keep going back to Scrabble, but to me, it's the same thing. It's, to me, it could be a product of imagination. It could be the fact that they could be conduits or mediums, and they're not understanding their abilities, and they're just kind of using these things as a scary coincidence. But other than that, I do not see the ability for a Ouija board to open up a portal.
Well, and I can see it too, that often people who use Ouija boards are really not well versed in the occult. Right. And they have a rather titillated attitude about it, and probably high adrenaline, and that if the spirit does come in, they're probably feeding off that energy and not in particular with the board.
More intention.
Right, more personal intent than anything.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, to me, it's more of the energy, like you said, the energy and emotion bringing forth something rather than the board. But since the board is a new addition to the equation, they're seeing it as the sole purpose, rather than just a coincidence.
It seems to me you would think that as society gets a little more sophisticated and we have more connection globally and by internet mass media, that people would be a little more skeptical of some of these stories. But it seems to me, from information you've given me, that a lot of these urban legends are pretty recent.
They are, and what's to me, I mean, that could be, a need for fame. It could be a need for this. I need to feel special. It could be misidentification. I mean, I'm not going to look at anybody directly and say, hey, you know what, I think your experience is full of crap. I'm not going to say that. I mean, because to me, I wasn't there. I mean, I could tell you what I think about their situation, but to me, it's more likely that they're either A, making something up, or B, they're misidentifying a real entity that they've never dealt with before, and they're looking for answers. And those answers, unfortunately, led them to entities that were made up or fictional. And since they don't have the time to do the real research, they're thinking that they're actually something that, they've actually experienced.
I mean, that makes sense. Can you give us an example of a recent one?
One of the ones that I've heard about the most is the rake. The rake was actually created on TV, on the internet in 2006 when an anonymous individual decided they wanted to create a monster. Now, this monster went through several changes. It went from talking about what it looked like, what it sounded like, what it ate, its behavior, where it was found, and all these things eventually were honed down into one creature, which they called the rake. Now, the rake is considered a pale-skinned, humanoid entity, pretty long fingers with claws, an extra row of teeth. To me, it was like an amalgamation of several scary concepts. Okay? Now, what people are seeing is that when they see these things and they're claiming to be the rake, there's several entities that appear or could appear to be the rake. You've got your Native American Wendigo, you've got your Oswong, you've got your, hell, the rake itself could be a tulpa, a tulpa is essentially a thought form where the more people that believe in it, the more energy it possesses, and, over time can manifest in the physical realm. But to me, it's more likely that it's, like I mentioned earlier, it's either fabrication or misidentification.
The other two examples of possible misidentification, can you explain what those entities are? Because they're not as well known as some.
Yeah, you've got the Slender Man concept, which everyone's talked about before, and there's even been some movies and some video games, and even an episode of Supernatural that came about that talked about the Slender Man. The Slender Man was another internet-created entity that people decided that, let's make something up and let's make some fake photos and let's talk about, its history and bring it back as far as we can and still leave it believable. The most well-known concept that could be related to Slender Man phenomenon is shadow people and the Hat Man, and all these shadow entities that either appear with a fedora or like a shadow or a silhouette of a suit and tie. Because even if you look at some of the experiences with the rake or with the Slender Man, the entity is always different. They always notice something new. And that kind of makes your concept for what you're dealing with a little far-fetched, in my opinion.
Right. It seems to me that some of these stories, as you said, kind of feed on, scary principles, and a couple things that come to mind. One is like cryptid animals, creatures, kind of playing on that primal fear.
Right.
Do you think there's any correlation to that and why people seem to take something that on face value seems fairly absurd and decide that they believe it?
Well, dealing with the paranormal just like I do, that, it's one of those things that people either they are completely skeptical or they really want to believe. And, you got that power of suggestion, you've got that we were all out in the woods and it was scary, and someone saw something and it led to this, and then, you know, for me, it could be the concept that people just want to experience something that's bigger than the natural, the material realm that they live in. You know.
You ran into someone like that tonight, John, didn't you?
Wanted to do instigation. Yeah, he was wanting to come to one of our tours and basically said, I said, well, we don't allow instigation and provoking. And, oh, well, that's what I want to do. And I said, well, then you're just not coming to our tours.
So you're saying that he wanted to try to provoke what was ever there?
Yeah, he wanted to provoke and try to get something to happen to him. I can give it to him for free, but he doesn't have to come to the tour. I didn't say that out loud. Nobody heard that.
Disclaimer.
Well,
Disclaimer.
Right. I mean, that's one of those concepts. It's a little bit that's borderline, and kind of what I'm trying to say. I mean, you've got that peer pressure, that people want to experience something that's going to make them different. You've got a lot of people who have either felt like they were, kind of passed over on the popularity train, or like they've got stuff going on at home. They need something to relate to make them feel special. I mean, who knows the reason why people come up with stories? It's something other than just to pass time. But I mean, the rake was even mentioned on a popular TV show, and you've got all these people claiming experiences on the show. And I mean, one guy even had a book about it that talked about how to get rid of them. That was 1,006 years old. And you know what? It's crap. Whether it was ratings or whether or not these people actually experienced something, I mean, to me, not doing your research is a horrible habit to get into, especially if you want to deal with the unknown and the paranormal, or hell, even medication for that matter. It's one of those things that if you don't have the knowledge, you need to find out what you're talking about, because if you don't, you're going to get into a lot more trouble, per se, dealing with these entities that, you've completely misidentified.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean,
100%.
I think there's probably an element, part, some people wanting the spook house, Halloween spook house adrenaline rush versus people who hear it and then just sort of some fear kind of takes over, almost like 1930s with War of the Worlds.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and so I think you have both things going on.
It's pretty extreme, 1930s War of the Worlds. My goodness.
Well, I know, but I mean, if you think about it, though, like the World of Worlds concept. I mean, if you think about that, all they had was the radio at the time. I mean, they used that mass hysteria in the radio, and they allowed that to fuel itself into a bigger fire that allowed things to be chaotic. Today you've got the internet, you've got people who see these things on TV. You know what I mean? Like, if you go on the internet and you type in the rake, you're going to come up with pictures, you're going to come up with case studies, you're going to come up with people who have, been haunted by these things for years, and then the person's going to go, holy crap, I mean, like, is this something that I'm experiencing? And then, later on down the road, if they find out that it's fake and this person had a genuine experience, they're going to think, you know what, maybe I'm crazy. Like, why am I dealing with this? Why am I seeing these horrible things, but yet what I'm being told what they are is fake? So now you've got a whole new set of issues. You've got a person who is going to stop talking to people about what they see and what they feel. They're going to either become aggressive or, even bottle those things inside, or what? I mean, I'm not saying that was the intention of the people who made the Rick's concept, but, I mean, you've got these people who are dealing with the unknown every day who are going to try to look for answers. And since they're scared or they don't know who to talk to, they're going to try to do those answers by doing their own research. And when you've got these entities that are just those grab bag entities, it's going to be hard for them to tell what's true and, what's fake, and it's going to cause a lot more issues for them in the long run. So, I mean, that's another reason why this whole fake entity stuff kind of just frustrates me, frazzles me a little bit.
Well, and I guess it just goes to show that, when Orson Welles did War of the Worlds, mass communication was fairly new, and people trusted the radio, and but it seems to be that as time's gone on and we've developed a lot more cynicism and distrust of government and even the media in general, at the same time, it still is having that same effect.
Right.
Now, granted, people aren't running out of their houses and everything at this point, but
what they are doing is they're running into the woods or running into these buildings looking for these entities.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they may not be running out in the street trying to see the aliens, but I mean, what they're doing is you've got people who are trying to track down these entities that are fake, or making up new case studies, or making up false experiences that could lead to more issues than just doing your own research.
Well, I think some of these experiences maybe, think of it in terms of people who have experiences that they truly label as UFOs or alien encounters, and then the kind of hysteria and bad press that these fake situations create. I think it makes people dealing with whatever it is they're dealing with harder, even if it's a separate sort of field, going as far as UFO and aliens.
Right. And then to me, it's easier for me to believe in the idea of aliens rather than to believe in them myself, because I've never experienced any type of alien phenomenon per se. But for me to think that there's nothing out there just because I haven't experienced it is kind of closed-minded, because we're finding new planets every day. We're dealing with new galaxies. For us to think that we're the only intelligent life in that entire system is not intelligent. So,
right. And I think that another thing, I think that people figuring out what is I hate to use the word hoax, but what is a fiction is something that the field needs to address. And so far, I haven't really seen it addressed.
Right. That's kind of what I claim to do in an extent, because, if I hear a case about an entity, for example, let's say we have a case study where a person was out in their yard and they live on the wood line, and they're seeing these entities, these beings, and they claim for them to be, let's just use the rake again. Let's say they claim to be the rake. I know for a fact that I'd want to be out there living for it, and doing whatever I can to, I don't want to say debunk their theory, because, they may be experiencing something, but to use the correct information and to use the correct resources and research available to me as well as to everybody else should be a key in this field. That's one reason I believe that the paranormal really hasn't evolved as much as it should, since it started, because with the advent of Photoshop and, us living in a technical age, evidence is super easy to fake, and that's a horrible thing that we have to deal with, and finding a way to find that balance between truth and fabrication is the key in this field. And, when you're dealing with entities that don't just pop up because we know exactly where they're at all the time, you make that evidence that we do have more about quality than quantity, and that's what's really hard in this field to do.
I guess sort of another angle is, what do you think? I think that people sometimes jump to want to believe some of these entities are real for various reasons. Now, then look at the situation where so many people are, they're watching the shows on TV and everything about ghosts, and so we're talking about it. Here we are saying a more traditional type entity, but something that does have a lot more basis for it, and we know that it was not created on the internet type thing. And they watch the shows and they decide, okay, I can buy a KT meter and an audio recorder and run out, and I'm doing all these things.
I'm a ghost hunter.
I'm a ghost hunter. So how do you compare that phenomena with the people who are buying into these fake entities?
Well, if we're going to talk about TV shows, let's talk about how, in one show they could talk about ghosts and they can talk about entities that are well known, and then on the next clip in the very same show, they're talking about stuff that's fake. People, even if they watch these shows and they're like, oh man, I'm really interested in this, I'm going to do it, and then they pick the spookiest entity on the show and it just happens to be a fake one. You know what I mean? The concept of oversaturation in this field is a horrible, horrible problem. And instead of, don't get me wrong, I know a lot of really new investigators who really take the time to do things diligently, But like you said, you can order a K2 meter, you can get your fancy flashlights, you can get these, echo boxes and the Frank boxes and the ghost boxes, and go out there and just listen to spirits. It's one of those things that I think that without knowledge, you're going into a dangerous field, and you could do it to the point where you're, chasing real entities and get caught up in something you don't want to be dealing with, or you could be chasing your tail and going after these ones that are fake. It's just, unfortunately, it's a time management and research point of view that people are lacking.
And I agree there, and I think that happens in a lot of different kinds of fields. At times you get oversaturation, and then
Right.
over time it kind of settles out, and people who are more serious about it tend to stick around. But during that flooding period, it gets kind of crazy. So
Right.
hopefully people who are in it for just a thrill-seeking venture, eventually do get sorted out. I think the most popular topic that is specious, it would be at this time would be the black-eyed kids.
I was just thinking about that.
Right. Now, to me, the concept of the black-eyed kids, okay, is there are a lot of reputable people who have had very interesting BEK, situations that have happened to them. The phenomenon is a very interesting one. The issue that I have with it is it's also very easily created. Any kid can go online and buy blackout contacts and go around town, pardon my language, acting like a douchebag, and scaring people to the point where, if you do your research for 10 minutes, you can read 150 different BEK stories and then buy your own blackout contact lenses and then, just go out and scare people just because you think it's funny. You know what I mean? Now, the whole idea as the eyes being the windows to the soul, is an old concept that has been just twisted and manipulated to death by Hollywood, and you can look at all these old movies and even look at them where they've got black eye, individuals who are demonic or possessed or, just otherworldly per se. While I think the concept of the BEK is something that people are dealing with, I do not think that it's an entity that is more than $39.99 at your local drugstore. So, it's one of those things that's so easily created,
Yeah, and if I recall, and I may be wrong, but isn't the first instance of it actually from a journalist?
Yeah, there is a journalist that has experienced. There's a lot of people who have. I know an author that was going to do a book on the BDK. Who he's a great author. I don't know if he's had any experiences or not, but when he put that concept out there on the internet, within hours he was getting thousands of stories. And like I said, it's one of those entities that you can fake rather easily, and as long as you're a good actor, you can scare people. And I just think that, to me, the BEK concept is far more Hollywood than what it was 100 years ago, when they couldn't be easily created. But that's my opinion on that subject.
And how recent are the tales of the black-eyed kids?
Oh, they go back, allegedly 50 years, 100 years, and then there's some as recently as yesterday. I'm sure you just got to look them up online. I was actually joking. I was joking with a friend of mine. Like these BEKs, they ask you for things like they want to get into your car, or you give them rides somewhere, or come into your house to buy, like use your phone, and you never hear about the people who do it. Like what happens if, I know that if one came to my house and asked to come inside and use my phone, I'd probably let them, and that's, I mean, if you think about that, what are they going to do? I didn't think that you're going to let me in, or they're either going to come in and, be an entity that I'm going to have to deal with, but you've got these cases where these people get this very dark feeling, and, they're scared. So when this kid asks for something, they say no, and they don't let them inside, or they drive away in their car. I mean, what happens if you let them in? Who knows? Like they either, like I said, they're either fake, or you've got to deal with something more sinister than contact lenses. But in my opinion, I think that if it ever happened to me, which I've never dealt with a BEK case directly, I would let them in just to see what happened. So.
That's an interesting take. Is that how many times has someone said, "Okay, I'll give you a ride home," or "Here's my cell phone," and and it is just a kid that's
right. I mean, I know that if I was,
or something.
Right. I know that if I was trying to scare somebody like that, and my plan was to scare them where they wouldn't let me do anything, and they handed me their cell phone, what would I do with it? I mean, who would I call? What type of supernatural entity is going to call someone on a cell phone, which they can't just go communicate with through their own particular means? So
exactly, kind of reminds me of the line from one of the Star Trek movies. I can't remember which one it was, where they're at the center of the galaxy, and there's an entity there that's been restrained there by somebody, and he wants the starship brought in, and
right.
Captain Kirk says, "What does God?" And they think it's God. Some of the people there, and he says, "What does God need with a starship?" Well, what does an entity need with a car ride or a cell phone?
Right. I mean, to me, it sounds like a mixture of Hollywood and the Hollywood vampire, where they can't come into your house unless you let them.
It does kind of that vampire mystique.
Right. Exactly. The scary, hypnotic, and I can't come into your house without permission. I mean. Come on.
It's just thinking that how many stories are actually from people that work in spiritual realms like yourself? I mean, you never hear of a BEK story from someone like that. At least I haven't. I've never read one. It's the everyday Joe. So you kind of wonder, if there is sort of any validity to it at all.
Yeah. It'd be nice if they did show up at your door, or my door, or John's, or someone like us.
No, not my door. It's good show. Yeah.
They'd have to wear the yellow contacts for John.
Yeah, that'd be better.
Yeah.
Black just freaks me out.
Well, and here's another thing is, most of these stories, from what I've seen, take place at night, outside, right. etc. And to be honest, in that kind of lighting, etc., often anyone's eyes are going to look blacked out.
Right.
Especially if they have dark eyes to begin with.
Right. And these, like I said, these contacts, they cover the entire eye,
Mm-hmm.
So there's no light at all. I mean, just the fact that you've got some crazy person that sneaks up on you and asking for stuff that you don't particularly want to let them use, and, they've got these black tie contacts is, I mean, it could be unsettling, but the fact that it's become a phenomenon it just blows my mind how gullible people can be.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to put the question out there for asking for black-eyed kid stories where they actually granted the request.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that'd be a really interesting concept because, like what happens? Do they just make the phone call and they go away, or these people never heard from again? That's a very good point. Maybe that's why we don't ever hear these stories, is because the people who let them in, they never come back. But I think it's more on the lines of, you call on somebody's bluff and cut the head off a snake type of thing, see what happens. So
yeah, I like that.
A small snake.
from the man who has a staff with them.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah, it's pretty tough.
It's all right, John. You don't have to compensate for me.
Ouch.
That hurt. Says the man using the pink cup. It's
Hey,
salmon.
it's got water in it. I've got a wife. So, I was talking about the whole, the fear of snakes, and you're handling the staff that has snakes on it. I was just trying to help you out on a fear base, not anything else that you happen to have crossed your mind.
To the man in a purple hat.
What are you trying to say?
Or you could have worn the green one.
I like it. That's so pretty.
Okay, we digress.
So I've got to ask, what's going on with the hats and the guy who was in the chair behind you? What's going on with that?
Who's acting up?
We're just acting up. We're getting to where we do something almost every show that's just a little odd. Viewers seem to kind of like it, so.
Well, I had a hat on last week.
Yeah, last week he had a tinfoil hat. We had a statue of a gray alien with a tinfoil hat on.
I'm looking for a unicorn hat. So,
Yeah? Okay.
yeah.
I can see if I can find one for you.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I'm not quite sure there. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just pretend this is a unicorn.
Okay. Okay, we're not going to get in a jousting match right now. Well, okay, you succeeded in breaking my train of thought.
Welcome.
Brian, how about more traditional stories? Are there any that stand out as more fear-based than reality?
There are. The issue that you have with a lot of these stories is that people and even skeptics can say that all of the entities that paranormal investigators or spiritualists deal with are nothing more than fear-based. Because you're dealing take Bigfoot for example. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of stories about Bigfoot. Dealing with either throwing rocks at people or just making his presence known. That's really scaring these people who are seeing him. But yet we've never actually had the chance to grab onto one or found any bodies or anything. And that could be. Hell, there's theories about Bigfoot being an alien. Where Bigfoot sightings occur near and oftentimes after alien sightings or UFO sightings. That could be a reason why we never see this creature. It could be here, being seen, being scared, scouting out the place, and then just leaving. Which makes it hard to find. To me, that's an interesting idea, but how are we going to prove it unless we see a flying saucer with Bigfoot driving it? It's going to be hard, to prove that theory. Just like it is with werewolves or vampires. Those are things that have been around for a long time. In Louisiana, they've got tours and deal specifically with myth and lore on werewolves and vampires. And there's even people that claim to be vampires, but actually having a genuine experience it's hard to say whether or not it's true or not. These people who are perceiving these things are often scared out of their minds, and they perceive it as real because, to them, in their hearts, they believe it, they experienced it. But for people who haven't experienced it, it's either kind of far-fetched or just an amazing story. There's really no parts 2 and 5 and 7 of that story make sense to me, while the other I think is crap. It's just unless you have a scientific way to deal with the paranormal, all it is conjecture for those who haven't experienced it. It's a really neat campfire story that it's one of those things that I've had personal experiences. I know Lisa has some, and I know John's had a few. A lot of those he's locked in his car when it happens, but you're still
in the back.
He's going to be under a blanket next
My
time.
ass is on the floorboard.
But
The biggest freaking man you'll ever meet in your life.
No, see, I don't believe that, John. But I mean, like, I know that we've all had experiences that to us are genuine. You
Mhm.
know, that even other spiritualists or other investigators who haven't experienced those things before may think that it's our emotions or our fears or, even the hyped up idea of the place that we are investigating. I mean, it's one of those things. It's almost impossible to sit down and prove one way or another unless we can apply scientific method to those things. So,
Did somebody just walk behind you?
nope.
Okay.
Maybe they did. I don't know.
I could swear I just saw a shadow back there, but
No,
again later. Could have just
no,
been screen.
it probably was because I've got the door shut here. So, but
If,
I mean,
if so, then we caught something.
Yeah, I'm gonna rewind
yeah, play that back. Let me know.
that. Yeah, if I find that, I'll send it to you.
You know, something else that's kind of popped in my head while we're talking is actually the Men in Black phenomena,
Right.
which often is related to UFO sightings,
Right.
etc. But actually, one of the earliest Men in Black stories is very credible. It comes from England back in the early 60s, and I don't know if it's the Snowden alien story. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basically, this family was out at a lake, I think, taking pictures, and the fella takes a series of three, thankfully, pictures of his little girl, and in the middle frame, it looks like someone in a spacesuit standing in the background. Does not appear in the first frame or the second, and he's been judged very credible. In fact, Kodak still to this day has a prize out there if anyone can prove that the picture was faked or somehow there's a cash prize that they'll give out and it's never been accepted. But within hours, these two, what later became known as Men in Black, showed up and started asking questions. And part of it was about where did you see the second man, spaceman or guy in spacesuit? And they said, we don't know anything about it. They didn't actually see the guy at the time,
Right.
just kind of a picture. And it came out later that a couple of weeks before that, there was a missile launch in England, and two figures in spacesuits were on the launch pad, and they caught it on video that they could never explain. But the interesting thing is that the description of the Men in Black was that they did not talk like normal people. It was very stilted, very as if someone speaking a new language. And at times, things like Slender Man, etc., kind of remind me of all that. How do you think all that plays in?
Well, I think the Men in Black is similar to the BEK concept, where anyone can wear black shades and wear a suit. You know what I mean? The government is one of those things where it's always been considered secretive and keeping things under wraps, and the whole concept of you've got the new level with conspiracy. Since I haven't actually got a chance to look at that particular case, I can't tell you my opinion on it, but I can tell you about the Men in Black concept. Is to me, it's one of those things that's more believable than anything else, just because you do have a government who might not feel that the people that it supports are entirely ready for all this information or new technology that they're dealing with. And you've got to have someone who is going to play the law enforcement or the cover-up expert in that phenomenon. I mean, big companies have them. They've got those people who try to spin things and make things less of what they are. For the government not to have them too is a ridiculous concept. So I know a lot of people who are interested in the Men in Black. So I mean, it's one of those things where it's hard to test unless you've actually seen one, or if have a whistleblower of some sort, you know?
Well, but I think the whole concept illustrates how psychologically people can be manipulated.
Yeah.
And from your perspective, if someone is having some sort of encounter that they're not sure about, what would you suggest to them as a way of, kind of a checklist or whatever about, are you being psychologically manipulated, or is this fear-based, or is this reality?
Well, the biggest thing, and probably the hardest thing to do, is you're going to have to stay calm. And you need to find a way to take in as much information as you can and document it somehow and look at it in a comfortable setting with new eyes, bring other people in on it to examine what you've gone through based on the information that you can provide. Like for example, if you've got a person who experienced a traumatic event, oftentimes 48 hours later, they'll be able to recall more of it, more of the situation that happened in smaller details because the adrenaline and the stress and the fear of dealing with that situation isn't as fresh in their mind. So before jumping to a conclusion, I honestly recommend, writing stuff down, waiting, 24 hours, writing more down that you remember, waiting another 24 hours, writing more down until you can actually see the big picture as a whole, but you've got all these details as well where you can also then take it to people who were not there, and sit down with them who have logical minds already and allow them to try to bounce these ideas off of it. Because if a lot of times people who experience something paranormal, it can either be, like we talked about earlier, xenonormal, which is perceiving something natural as paranormal, like swamp gas, for example. Back when people saw these glowing balls, they were like, oh my God, what is this? And then as time and science progressed, we realized that it was swamp gas and not necessarily a ghost or a spirit that some people thought. Or, you do have a fabricated case where people are dealing with something that they made up, or you do have those people who are dealing with something paranormal. And from that paranormal concept, it's always better to try to talk with it in a larger group, or at least people who can try to see the skeptical point of view. That way, a hysteria or a psychological implant or some type of misdiagnostics come from just not meaning to do so. So, I think that's the easiest way, is to recall as much information you can over a period of a few days, and then, talk to credible people who you can trust to give you honest feedback. And then do your research if it plays more out than that.
Let's turn the tables just a little bit. There are a lot of stories of entities and creatures of a paranormal nature that have become sort of legendary. And, say the Mothman, and there's others out there. How do you compare those kinds of things and people's experiences to differentiate that as something that is happening versus the sort of the mass hysteria or the fear-based experiences?
Well, what makes those legendary cases legendary is that you've got people in large amounts experiencing them. Like for example, you use the Mothman. He was seen by hundreds and hundreds of people at the same time. It wasn't like you have a small group of people in an unknown setting, and they knew that this creature might live there, which they got that fear already going in their head, going and seeing something and then like blowing it out of proportion. To me, it's like playing that old game telephone where you whisper something into someone's ear and by the time it's done, it's a completely different story. It's one of those things where if you've got hundreds of people seeing something from the same in the same location from a different perspective, you're going to get multiple stories. Those stories will spread like wildfire. And when you're dealing with these legendary cases where you've got, for example, you got Bigfoot, you've got the Mothman, you've got you've got werewolves, vampires, you've got the Ozark Howler. I mean, it just depends on the frequency and the credibility of the people who are experiencing it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And, there are actually creatures that are also stemming from origin. Like, for example, Bigfoot is the evolutionary gap between animals and humans. I mean, that sounds likely versus some entity that is, if you spend 20 minutes researching, you're going to find that some kid on the internet made it up. You know what I mean? You've got to know your sources. You've got to take into consideration, the seed from which this plant of mysticism and, the unknown perception is growing from. It's not like I'm going to go out and do a case and, allow a person to tell me that they saw the devil, in an old tortilla shell that they had. Now it's haunting their house. You know what I mean? Like, you've really got to take the time to break down the case.
Rid of that Cheeto. Sorry.
The whole tortilla shell trick. I'm still laughing about that one because you posted something about that.
Right. But, I mean, that's what you have to consider. You have to consider the origin of what you're dealing with and how far back it goes, rather than, this is scary, I think it's going to happen. Research is the key to all of this, and what makes a legendary creature legendary is the fact that you've got all these people experiencing it. You've got the research to back it up, and people are still experiencing this creature or this entity that has not been found yet. That's what gives it that spark of mysticism, that concept of belief, versus something like the rake, where you can go out into 100 people and talk about the rake, and maybe 10 of them will know what it is. But if you go out into that same 100 people and you're like, hey, there's Bigfoot, I guarantee everyone's going to know what you're talking about.
Well, very true. Or they know what a werewolf is, or a vampire, or...
Well, I mean, and here's another thing. Every culture has a similar... If we use Bigfoot, every culture has a similar version of it. You've got the Yeti, you've got Momo, you've got the ones who... I can't remember what they're called in the Aborigine tribes, but that's what I'm talking about. Now, when you talk about the rake, if you go over to China and you mention the rake, they're going to wonder what the hell you're talking about. Why?
Right.
Because mostly an internet phenomenon here in the United States. Same thing with, Slender Man, or, take your pick. So, for me, if it's going to be legendary, it has to have staying power. It's got to be cultural referenced, and it's got to be one of those things that people who are credible witnesses are actually seeing these things. It's not something that you find on a weekend camping trip that no one's ever heard of.
Right. And I think sometimes maybe misconception comes from, perhaps if it's a misidentification, not being familiar with the cultural reference of an entity, say Native American, even if we're talking just the United States.
Right.
Real quick, why don't you throw out a couple of the entities that you talked about that very briefly as Native American, and what they are, so people get a comparison.
Like I mentioned the Wendigo earlier. Wendigo is a cannibalistic, essentially an ice entity. Some people call it a demon. That basically, there's two different stories. One, either the person has used magic incorrectly or in a negative fashion, and they consume them, and after death they're repenting for these sins. Another version is it's a person who died of cannibalism or died and was on the verge of death and resorted to cannibalism. And the Native Americans, obviously believe that the body is also a very important part of the person and their soul and their energy. So consuming another individual has turned them into some sort of monster, which caused them to transfigure into essentially a flesh-eating entity that causes havoc.
I see.
Now, the reason why,
etc. Yeah.
Right, and that's why I threw the rake in there, threw that in there with the rake, is because the rake is considered to be a flesh-eating entity that's also so pale and kind of misshapen, which also leads to, you mentioned vampire, which leads to the Aswang, which is Philippine. It's also the interesting thing about the Aswang is it appears human during the day and transforms into this pale, long-tongued, clawed type of vampire at night that feeds off of spinal fluid, off blood. It also feeds off of pre-renal. Wow, I just completely.
Hey, Brian, we're running out of time. Real quickly, give viewers contact information where they can get a hold of you if they have a case they'd like you to consult on.
Of course. You can email me at the Third Eye Chronicles. That's the name of my consultation group. The email is IIIRD.Chronicles@gmail.com. You can get a hold of me through there or through Lisa or John or HPRO, the Heartland Paranormal Research Organization.
Well, Ryan, we sure appreciate you coming on. And
great having you again, yeah.
Yes.
Anytime, good. Next time I'll wear a hat.
Okay. Make it a surprise.
I will.
Good evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.